Since Graham Coughlin took charge of Newport County last season, they've averaged ninth in League Two. And on that logic, if they can keep some continuity, they could be contenders for the playoffs next season if they can keep that form going. But they've lost key players. So will it be as simple as that without the likes of Cameron Norman and Priestley Farquharson? Really intriguing season ahead, I think, for Newport County. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ed from the 1912 Exiles podcast. How are you, Ed?
Yeah, not too bad. Nervous ahead of the new season, but trying to be as positive as I can.
Absolutely. Well, it's lovely to have you on. We're hoping to be joined by Keiron Jones, who's another Newport County fan, to discuss all things Exiles. Quick public service announcement. We're also covering all 72 clubs between mid-June and mid-July on EFL Debate, these summer deep dives. They're available on YouTube and Spotify. And if you're watching this on either of those platforms, do give us a subscribe because it helps us out a lot. And go check out the others once you're done with this one. Coming to you first then, Ed, I suppose I'd like to go back to the starting point for Newport County, which is how much of this season are you excited for because of the form that you found under Graham Coughlin, and how much of it is trepidation of you, as you called it, because of the key players that are leaving?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a little bit of both. We had a good second half of the season under Coco, as he's become known. We found a way to play that was pragmatic. We managed to at first grind out some results and some draws, and then kind of build on that, and ended up playing, some relatively good football. We're not going to win loads of awards for kind of ticker-tacker passing, but we were more expansive. Definitely in January, February, I was watching us grind out results and thinking this will keep us up, but I don't know whether I'll want to renew my season ticket. By the end of the season, I was thinking, yep, I can see what we're doing. This is really good. Over the summer so far, it's been tough. We're losing Cameron Norman, who has been a really big player for us. Priestley Farquharson, who we never quite saw enough of because of injuries, but clearly was a talented player, has gone as well. We may well lose Mickey Demetrious, who has been a stalwart of our defence for a number of years. So there is a sense.
Yeah, sorry, it'll feel strange seeing a Newport defence that doesn't have Mickey Demetrious in it. It's just surreal.
But there is, I mean, we said on our end of season pod, like there is a big challenge about the fact that we are losing a lot of our core defenders, but there is an opportunity in that as well, because last season we scored goals in reasonable number. The problem was in letting them in at the other end. And so although we had a lot of players who've been around the club a long time and who've got kind of cult hero status, Cam Norman in particular, actually, there are problems in that defence, and Coughlin, as a former centre-back himself, will have seen that this is a work in progress, and change and reform and evolution of that defence was needed. And so, although I think it is going to be something of a transition season with new players coming in and us trying to find a new way of playing and a new way of defending, I think it probably is necessary in a strange way, but we'll see how we do. The second half of the season under Coughlin was good. I think the form was kind of broadly top half form, even though we ended up finishing 15th, something like that. But we have expectations on the one hand of maybe doing a little bit better next year because we'll have a full season with Coughlin. On the other hand, financially, the club is perhaps not in the strongest position. We will have one of, if not the lowest budgets in the league. So I think another mid-table season probably beckons. But if we can maybe have a cup run, or if we can make ourselves entertaining to watch, I think given everything that's going on at the club, that maybe would be fine for most of us. I'd certainly take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Make Rodney Parade a fortress again in those cup competitions. Delighted to be joined by Keiron Jones. How are you, Keiron?
Yeah, not bad. Honestly, sorry for being so late. I just entirely lost track of time. But yeah, you know what? I'm here. Better late than never.
Absolutely. Lovely to have you on, mate. Thank you so much for joining us. We've just been talking with Ed about the sort of conflicting feelings with Newport County fans, the sort of optimism that there's going to be a full season with Graham Coughlin and obviously top 10 form under him last season, but also the loss of key players. So I suppose I'm just wondering where you're sort of sitting on that spectrum.
Oh, good question. I mean, we've not had the worst start in terms of a transfer window. We've lost 2 influential players, of course, but we brought in 4 very decent ones. The one that we've signed yesterday, there's not much known about him, but still, we've got a squad capable of potentially mid-table. I'm assuming Coughlin is one of the managers that we would have seen last season wants to drive the team further up the field, up the table, and wants to grind out results. So, I mean, I'd hope a top 10 thing if we can keep up that form going into next season. I wouldn't complain at all, but I mean, based off of the recent AGM meetings we've had, we're not the best in terms of like budget, income, whatever else. There was a load of speculation and stuff with that went a lot further than it really should have, but that's an entire different topic. But no, pretty much my kind of thoughts are, as long as we stay in the division, I'm happy. If we can get higher up the table, though, I wouldn't complain at all.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case. Coming to you, Ed, we've, I suppose, Kieran there touched on the fact that finances are going to be tight once again, which you'd expect for Newport County being one of the smallest clubs, I think it's fair to say, in League Two. But if you've been back in the Football League for 10 years now, does it still feel to you like Newport County is still run a little bit like a non-league club?
I think that's probably pushing it a little bit. Look, we're a fan-owned club, and that brings pros and cons, right? I am a big fan of the fan-owned model. That's how I think all football clubs should be run. That I think is in the best long-term interests of clubs, even if it does mean you have to cut your cloth according to what's available. And clearly, in the season ahead, where you've got the likes of Wrexham, but also big teams like Bradford and so on, Newport are a minnow in that division. And when we are fan owned and don't have a rich benefactor pumping money in, we will struggle to compete. But what's the thing they say? Virtue has its own rewards, and I think being a fan owned club where we try to live within our means and make ourselves sustainable and keep a kind of an honesty to it, I think that's a really admirable thing. And yes, it probably does mean that our expectations are more around survival in this division than kicking on. But as long as we do it in the right way, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I spent some time with our county and the community team and some of the work that they're doing in the local area, engaging with not just supporters, but the wider community. I think we're in a really good position to do all of that stuff better, make the people around Newport and around the club not just feel better, but have better lives. And I think if we're doing that, then, okay, maybe we're not going to be challenging for the playoffs, but in the kind of totality of things, I'm really proud of Newport as a club for doing it the right way. And I'd rather that than have, some Hollywood superstar come in and change the club by turning it into something unrecognisable.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that it's such a special thing in many ways to own your football club and feel like you're really part of something as a support base, and I can really appreciate that. I think though that I suppose one of the drawbacks, and not necessarily even just about investment, but being a fan-owned club means that there can be such a communal approach to decision making that sometimes that can actually compromise the smoothness of the operational aspect, because it's like everyone's got to either agree or come to some sort of compromise where everyone's happy. And it feels like if more people are involved in the decisions, then the actual decisions themselves can sometimes take longer. I feel like that can hold you back a little bit as well.
I mean, Kieran may have a different view on me from this, and so I'll let him in a moment. But the fan-owned model is, like I say, is not perfect, and probably the way that Newport are implementing it currently is not perfect. We've seen that in the recent fans meetings where we've learnt about financial shortfalls and everything else. I don't think that means you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there are things that Newport County supporters trust need to do in order that we have more and better skills on the trust board and on the club board to address some of the challenges that we've got. But I do think that the trust model can work, and it does work. There are teams, Exeter, a really good example, where this stuff is done really, really well. I think Newport are still a little bit off that, but we're not as far into our journey as perhaps teams like Wimbledon, for example. So the model still needs some tweaks to it. That's undoubtedly true, but I don't think you throw it all out because you've had 1 or 2 years where it's perhaps not performed as well as you might. But I don't know, Kieran, you may have a different perspective, because I am aware that my view is perhaps something of a minority one amongst fans at the moment.
I mean, overly no. The situation we've got, being a fan-owned club, just to be in the football division, I think is a level above what we were really expecting. To be in there for so long is such a admirable thing to kind of look upon. I'm personally not too bothered of can we push higher, whatever. I'm just happy that we've got a club that seems to be run relatively well. Like you've said, there's certain shortcomings and situations that we're not doing perfectly, and if we are to do them perfectly, who knows where we end up this season going into the future. But I personally think that because of how modern football is going with ownership, and we've talked about clubs being purchased by Hollywood millionaires, a certain team I won't name, of course, but yeah, within that, I think it's something that we can't ignore. I think it's something we'll have to phase towards, whether that means we do a kind of, I've heard some talks of a hybrid type investment, where you want to say some is owned by the trust, some is owned by a big name investor, but with that you have to get the right name that I think a majority would agree on. But overall, I'm happy with how the club's run. I'm happy with the trust. I'd be completely fine if it stays how it is, but give it a few years and maybe we'll have to change that up.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a real credit to any club that's fan owned to have a football league club. I think that's a real credit to you lot. Let's move the conversation on to Graham Coughlin then, Ed. You mentioned that around sort of January time you were kind of grinding out results and making steady progress, but actually second half of the season played a bit more football. So I'm just curious to ask, what are some of the technical tweaks that Graham Coughlin made in order to make that the style of football at Rodney Parade a little bit more aesthetically appealing?
Well, let's start off by the stuff he did to shore things up, because I think you kind of have to understand that first. He came in and there was, under James Rowberry, who I've got so much respect for James Rowberry, he really tried to implement a vision. I think arguably he maybe didn't have the players at his disposal that maybe he was used to having when he'd been coaching at Cardiff City or, Wales Youth Setup and so on. And I think that's where maybe he struggled, is he was trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear type thing. But he had tried to get us to play it out from the back, passing along the back line, all of that stuff, which didn't work. And we ended up shipping a lot of goals as a result. Coughlin came in and said, right, if you're a defender, your number one job, get the ball down the other end of the pitch, because the other team are not going to score if the ball's in their half. So for the first few months, it was very much our defence got the ball and they hoofed it up to a big man. And it wasn't great, but we did concede fewer goals. We ground out some draws. We ground out some clean sheets, which was much needed, and confidence then got a boost. After that, there was then a sense of, right, okay, we will play it, but we do it in a direct way. If we're gonna pass the ball, it's passing with a purpose. We're not going to pass it along the back line. That Simpsons thing of holds it, just keeping it along the back line. Yeah, it was very much, right, if you're the defender and you get it, you either are passing it up through the midfield or you're going to use our wing backs, because we had Cameron Norman on the right, and a lot went through him. On the left, it varied. Sometimes it was Adam Lewis, now gone back to Liverpool after a good loan spell. We had Will Evans, Aaron Lewis. we'd use those three interchangeably. But it was very much a sense of, right, we're going to use the wing backs as the means to get it forward down the wing, swing it in for Omar Bogle, who ended up, with a very good season and a good goals return. I suspect that will still be the system we will use next season. We will have to have some changes of personnel because Norman has gone. Aaron Lewis has yet to sign a contract. So there may be some changes, but I think that principle of use the wing backs, and then maybe if we've got one or two capable midfielders, the likes of Aaron Wildig potentially, who can bring it through the middle occasionally if we want to try something different, that's kind of where we'll go. But yeah, it's passing with a purpose is how I would describe Graham Coughlin. It's not just keep possession. It's if we're going to have possession, we're going to get it forward and we're going to try and create stuff.
That sounds very hopeful. Kieran, Ed mentioned Omar Bogle there, and he's a striker that I used to watch a little bit going back to his Solihull Moors days, actually, and I knew he was very good then. And then he actually had a really good record at Grimsby. But then once he went higher up the leagues from Grimsby, think he didn't necessarily have things all his own way. He struggled a bit in the Championship at Cardiff, at Birmingham, maybe one or two other clubs higher up, and even possibly at Hartlepool to an extent. But I've always felt like he's a centre forward that needs a bit of an arm around the shoulder and possibly needs a sort of very tailored type of management. And when he hasn't had that, I think he's struggled. But I think we've seen maybe the versatility in Graham Coughlin's man management qualities that actually can bring the best out of someone like Omar Bogle.
I mean, yeah, he's towards the end of the season, probably one of, if not the most influential player, certainly up top, but maybe throughout the whole team. Again, the argument of how influential both wing backs was a very important part in our Coughlin setup. But no, the thing with Bogle, like you said there, he seems to, from what I've seen and from what I've heard off of other people, if he doesn't have a kind of potential second option that he can not rely on necessarily, but he has that kind of option to play to, because he's a very good individual player for a good majority of the time. But obviously, there's only so much you can do with the kind of player that he is, a lot more of a finisher, goal scorer, not maybe as technical on the ball as your maybe Charlie McNeil, Callum Kavanagh. So I think a big point of his turnaround was in January when we brought in our signings of McNeil and Kavanagh, when the options that Bogle had with McNeil, especially when he had that kind of option, he was able to kind of perform more than we'd ever seen. Because he had a very interesting season. Started off great, and then he went on like a 10-game plus situation of not scoring a goal before then relaying a bit more form then towards the end of the season, being nominated for Player of the Month and whatever else towards the end of the season. But yeah, he's a great player. I mean, there's a situation where you need to have a good setup around him. He can't do everything on his own, like you potentially see a different attacker doing. But if he has the right setup around him, which I think Coughlin's kind of, he hasn't fully developed yet, but he got towards something towards the end of the season, and it's something that we can probably look forward to next year as some more goals from him.
Don't you think, Kieran, a lot of it is about finding the right partner for him? Because people look at him and think he's a big, physical, strong striker, so we'll use him as a big, like, number 9 type and just hoof the ball up to him. And like, he can do that, but I don't think that's his best game. Actually, because I slightly disagree with you. I think he is good at some of the technical stuff, and what he needs is someone else big and strong who can, tie the big centre half up in knots. And Bogle is the one who actually can do a lot of the feeding off scraps. But it's just that physically, because he doesn't look like that sort of player, people sometimes like misjudge him a bit. And I think you're right. He improved in the second half of the season, but I also think a big moment was Afrandi Zanzala getting a long-term injury and then getting another one, because I think those two together could work, but I still think probably you need someone of Bogle's size up alongside Bogle so that Bogle can do the other stuff.
Although I suppose the only downside to that is that do you miss someone who can stretch the line as well? Because if you bring in a back to goal centre forward and you have Omar Bogle, then sometimes I think when you play two up top, sometimes you need someone who really gets in behind and stretches things as well. So it's an interesting one for sure. Keiron, coming to you, how many more additions do you think Newport are going to need this summer?
It all depends on realistically where we want to aim. If we're aiming for just survival, I'd say we probably have a squad that is just about capable of doing that when you look around the teams that you'd potentially see around our level dropping towards potentially more bottom half. But it all depends, like I've said, on how we want to progress forward this season. The option of having another striker up with Bogle is honestly something I've not necessarily looked at. I've more looked at him as, I don't know, one option if the wing backs are influential enough, he's there. But I wasn't at too many games at the end of the season, so I'm not going to be one to immediately judge that. From what I saw, he was a lot more of the physical player. But it all depends on where we want to aim for how many signings we need.
Where do you think Newport should be aiming for then?
Oh, good question. I don't know. In all honesty, this season's going to be such a interesting one with how many teams that are going to be pushing up towards the higher ends of the table that I don't know what we want to aim for, and I don't know how many players we want to bring in. But if I was to say options, I'd say potentially a new creative midfielder to, I guess, kind of compensate with the departure of Cameron Norman because of how influential he was. Sure. Depending on if Aaron Lewis goes, I feel a potential replacement for that could be needed, but Bonswell could be that option to replace Aaron Lewis should he go. There were a few question marks when he was brought in yesterday, I did see, but and again, it all depends on if Demetrious stays. I think if he goes, we need another leader that can have that kind of role. I know we have players like James Clark that have shown dividends in those kind of levels before, but it could be one that we need to kind of change on. And yeah, the striker thing is, for me, I don't know. I think if Zanzala gets back maybe towards Christmas, we won't need another striker, but I don't know. It all depends on how many games, not how many games are in the season. It all depends on fitness levels of the strikers that we have and who we can bring up. I know that Keeban Rai could have a very influential part on the season playing up front. So potentially a central defender, I should say, a fullback potentially, depending on the situation regarding Aaron Lewis, and then maybe a midfielder that can create more opportunities and an extra striker.
So about 4 or 5 additions. Would you agree with that, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see us bring in another 5. I don't think we will because I don't think we've got the budget. One thing that's been one thing that's really struck me is the players who Coughlin has brought in and prioritised are ones who can play, 2, sometimes even 3 positions. Having that versatility and that flexibility in the squad, I think, is going to be really important. You've got the likes of Will Evans who can play out on the left or who can play up front. I'd love it if we could get Aaron Lewis back, someone who could play on the left as a left wing back, a right wing back, or central midfield. Those I think are the sorts of players who are going to be worth their weight in gold this season because last year we probably had a squad that was slightly too big and perhaps a little bit lacking in quality. This season, I think we have so far broadly managed to replace the quality of some of the players we've lost, but we're not going to have the strength in depth. And so we are occasionally going to be relying either on players maybe playing out of their favoured position, or we're going to be relying on some of those young players. Kieran's mentioned Keeban Rai, who is a really promising talent, but I suspect will get shipped out on loan, but he may have a role to play. Young Harrison Bright as a right right back or right wing back. Again, I suspect that's more of a backup, but we may find we are calling on those players in a way that we wouldn't have done in the last season or two. So I think we will have a few more coming in, particularly if we do lose Mickey Demetrious, if we do lose Aaron Lewis. But I think the thing to watch is how many positions can they play? Because if they are able to cover us in a few positions, then I think that's what we're going to really be looking for and prioritising.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in defence and midfield, you've got some flexibility there because if it's a 3-5-2, because you can sign a centre back who can play anywhere in the back three, or you can sign a midfielder who can play anywhere in the midfield three. So that would probably make sense, and certainly versatile wing backs would help. Could you talk to us in a little more detail, Kieran, about Kib and Ray and why Exiles fans are so excited about what he can do?
I mean, there's obviously not from the player base, but the whole media coverage that he had recently. That was a bit of excitement with him being the first player from Nepal, I'd like to say, to sign a professional contract with a EFL club. So that was a bit of a big amount of excitement throughout all of Newport fans. But other than that, in terms of him playing, when he came in, I don't actually think he played too much. What was it, like 2 games? He had a start at the end of the season, which I think is the one I'll focus on, because that was where we saw a bit more of him, the final game against Crewe. And in that game, he didn't seem out of place. He seemed that he wanted to actually play, and he really was giving it his all. So I think the main bit of excitement, and the reason that I would say personally he could get a breakthrough into the team, is that he looks like he wants it. He looks like he really wants to drive forward and play that option of being, I don't know, potential extra striker should be needed if Zanzala goes off with another injury at some point this season. But I think the reason that overall Newport fans are so excited about what he could do is because what we saw from him was really promising. He had that kind of ambition to play, and that's something that we can't really say that we've seen with too many players. I understand we've seen with a few, but I think just off of media coverage and what I saw off of him and what other Newport fans saw off of him, he looks really promising.
I think attitude is a big thing as well, because he's a talented lad. Nathan Wood, who we've signed over the summer as well, looks like a really talented prospect from Pennybont, but a Newport boy. But you get talented youngsters coming through. The key thing is attitude and application. Are they going to want to improve? And we don't see what happens in training. But I watched an interview with Kib and Rai. I watched an interview with Nathan Wood, and I with both of them, I thought, God, what grounded, sensible, focused young men. Really mature in their outlook. Different perhaps from some of the players who've come through, burned very brightly, but not for very, very long, and have ended up being kind of shipped out at the end of the season. I think it's the attitude that is exciting just as much as anything else, because both of them are players who clearly have got talent. I mean, one of the goals Nathan Wood got last season in the Cymru Prem, was astonishing. They're good players, but they've got the attitude and the application as well. And I think that's the thing that marks them out to me.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and hopefully they'll get their opportunities in pre-season, because if the squad is going to look a little bit thin going into some of those early pre-season games, they'll probably get their opportunity to impress Graham Coughlin. Hopefully that can inform his thinking for the league. I'm really excited to see what happens with Sam Bowen this season, Kieran, because I think it's fair to say last season didn't quite go as he was hoped, but he came, I seem to recall, from Cardiff under 23s with quite promising reviews. So is there a chance that he could maybe pick things up in his second season?
I mean, definitely. There's a reason we've obviously picked him up. There's something about him that has quality to be in and about the starting 11. I've supposedly seen things that he had kind of off the pitch issues that must have impacted him at some form in this season. So, yeah, he's got the quality, of course. He would have been shipped out, of course, otherwise by a Coughlin. The nice thing about the way he manages is that he isn't complacent. He always wants an improving team. And with that, he's let players go youth academy players that may not have fit into a system, or he may not have deemed good enough. But he's definitely got the quality to play. Otherwise, obviously, he would have been, I don't know, maybe sold, sent on loan, whatever else. But yeah, I think there was a lot of situations outside of football throughout last year that would have impacted him playing last season. But the only hope is that with these preseason games we've got, he gets the chance to impress like we have with all the other youth players coming in. And with that, he can kick on and have a decent season in and about the starting 11.
Is there an onus, Ed, on players like Sam Bowen and Declan Drysdale, who I think it's fair for me to say, didn't necessarily rip it up last season in their first seasons at Rodney Parade, for them to maybe kick on next season, seeing as the squad's going to be smaller and they probably will get more opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. I think those two are in slightly different camps. I think Drysdale will play next season. I think he's one who undoubtedly has the quality, maybe was a little bit inconsistent at times last season, but also struggled to break in because there were some better players ahead of him. He will get his chance. I have no doubt he will step up. I have no doubt he will play 30 plus games this season and will do extremely well. And I think Coughlin has helped him to improve. Bowen, I think, is in a slightly different situation for some of the reasons Keiron said. I'm old enough to remember watching Sam Bowen's dad play for Newport.
20
it's
years ago. Worrying when you have those situations.
And his dad Jason got diagnosed with motor neuron disease last season, which is very sad for everyone who enjoyed watching Jason Bowen play for myriad Welsh clubs. But also, it will, of course, have had an impact on Sam Bowen, and I think that will have been part of the reason why perhaps he struggled a little bit off the pitch last season. I think on the pitch, my criticism of him is he sometimes played the safe pass rather than trying to drive forward, and I think he's one who I'd really like to see him go out and have a couple of months on loan, maybe in a kind of Cymru Prem team.
Can you afford to do that though, Ed?
I think we have to, because I think with Sam Bowen at the moment he's too far off being the finished article, and what he needs to do is to rediscover his confidence, get some regular football, and create some chances or score some chances, and just remind himself what he's really good at, because he's undoubtedly got some talent for the reasons that Keiron said, but he's not gonna get his confidence going, and he's not going to show us what he can do with bit part appearances off the bench and in Spotifan Trophy games and all the rest of it. He needs to just get out, get 10 games, 15 games playing at a lower level, and then maybe he can come back in January. And you're right, that's a big call to make, but I think probably he actually just needs to get regular first team football.
I would, in a way, commend the club's vision if they were willing to make that sort of decision in the long-term interests, because I think that's what the best clubs do. But if we look at the midfield options at the moment, I've got a Wikipedia page open. Obviously, Sam Bowen's one of the midfield options. You've got James Waite in there. Scott Bennett can play there, although he may be asked to deputise in central defence. You've got Aaron Wildig, can suffer with injuries sometimes. You've got Bryn Morris in there. But I've named 4 midfielders there. And if we're saying Newport are going to struggle to make 5 additions this summer, 4 or 5 additions, it does feel like numbers are going to be tight, and I feel like if an injury crisis strikes, then the decision to then loan somebody out might then. I'm not sure. I feel like that would be a bit of a step, personally.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We will, I think, still garnish that squad with a loan signing or two, and I would imagine midfield and striker are probably where we would be looking to bring in some loanees. So that's a possibility. Mm-hmm. And then, there's some youngsters who we've got coming through who may be options who you could give the odd start to or the odd 20 minutes off the bench to. I just feel like Bowen perhaps it's not in the team's interests or his at the moment for him to be doing that. And there's probably different options that you would look to push. And again, it comes back to what I said earlier. You've got a few players, the likes of Morris, the likes of Bennett, who you can play in multiple positions. They can play centre back. They can play midfield. So I think the fact that there's a little bit of flexibility within the squad, I'm not too worried actually about midfield. I think I'm more concerned. I think we need another good striker, ideally a permanent signing or a season-long loan, someone who we can really put up front with Bogle, as I was talking about earlier. I think we probably need another centre half because I'm working on the assumption that Mickey Demetrious is not going to re-sign. I think those are the things we've got to nail over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. That certainly makes sense. Keiron, I'm a little bit worried that one of the things that I would associate with Newport County, especially in their most successful periods in recent years, is this sort of core of really driven characters. I would put Mickey Demetrious, who Ed mentioned in there, in that bracket. I would put Cameron Norman in that bracket. But I would worry that if Demetrious and Norman go, that, you know, do the options in terms of that core leadership group dwindle a little bit. Joe Day's staying, so hopefully he can stay on, maybe James Clark. But I do wonder, is Scott Bennett going to take on more importance this season if the number of obvious go-to generals kind of dwindles down a little bit?
I mean, I'm sure that Bennett will know his role and know what he's going to kind of expect of the season in terms of game time. In terms of a character in the squad, like you've mentioned, Joe Day, Clark, Bennett, they're just a few characters. Of course, Demetriou. I'm more towards the optimism that he is going to stay, but that's just me being, could potentially me being overly optimistic. But no, with that, I think we got a squad that is full of leadership. In terms of Bennett's role, it all depends on what happens during the summer now, during the rest of this window. Who do we bring in if we are to add a couple of extra midfielders? Because, I don't know, potentially more depth, like you mentioned, with Sam Bowen and potentially being loaned out. It all depends really on what we kind of have to relay on our summer. But if you're talking right now, I feel like Bennett's on the bench, but he will be in that kind of situation of I feel heavy involvement throughout the season, and especially when we kind of expect injuries and whatever else, he's definitely going to have that role of stepping up when he has to, and he's done it on so many occasions before that I could see him playing a pivotal role.
I started the closed season worrying about experience and lack of experience because of the players who we're losing. But actually, I'm intensely relaxed about it now, because if you look at the number of players, the likes of Joe Day, Nick Townsend, Scott Bennett, you've mentioned, but then there's also players like Harry Charsley, who we haven't mentioned so far, but another great midfield option who's got plenty of games under his belt. You've got the likes of James Clark, again, very experienced. We brought in Carl Jameson, who's played a lot of games. And then you've got players who, maybe are a little bit younger, but are perhaps now graduating from being more junior members of the squad into being kind of seasoned pros, the likes of Declan Drysdale. So even if we lose Mickey Demetriou, even if we lose Aaron Lewis, I think there's enough leaders within there that probably we're going to be okay. And it was something that really worried me at the start of the summer. But I think now, looking at who we've recruited and looking at some of the characters who perhaps can step up and fill that void, I think we're going to be all right on that score.
It's an interesting you mention Harry Charsley, actually, because sometimes it can happen like that, where players sort of mature when they need to sometimes, and when there's a void at the top of a leadership group, sometimes new players can step up. And I want to come to you, Keiron, on Harry Charsley, because this is someone who Graham Coughlin first worked with at Mansfield Town. And I remember watching Charsley play for him actually with the Stags, and you could see he was such a fit lad, such an athlete, so aggressive. And I feel like he really suits the blueprint that Graham Coughlin has created there.
I mean, yeah, definitely. The energy levels definitely haven't dropped since the time that I've seen at Mansfield, the very little that I did see. He's been an incredibly influential player throughout the time he's been here. Really did slide into the midfield, and obviously he's going to work within a Coughlin system because he's worked with Graham before. But yeah, I mean, I have nothing but praise for him. He's a midfielder that I have a lot of liking about. So I don't know. There's not much else I can say. There's only real positive reviews.
I've just had a message, Ed, saying he's Harry the Mountain Goat, Charsley. Where does that nickname come from?
That was something that when we were asking Vale fans to give us a bit of info on him when he signed in January, someone said, "Oh, he's a proper mountain goat. Like he just like gets on and does stuff, and he doesn't always do the step overs and the flicks and the tricks, but he just makes stuff happen. He's just there. He's like Mr. Consistency. Like, I'm a big Harry Charsley fanboy. I think of all the things that Graham Coughlin did that solidified us last year, Charsley coming in January was the moment when you went, okay, we're going to be all right. He a little bit like Scott Bennett. He maybe doesn't always get an 8 or a 9 out of 10 himself. He's always like a 7 out of 10 player, but he allows the players around him to get the 8s, the 9s, the 10s by doing the hard yards. And I love players like that. And I think, I'm going to slightly disagree with Kieran. I think if it's a midfield 3 next season, I think Bennett, Charsley and Wildig, there's some experience in there. There's a lot of tenacity in there. And there's little bits of kind of creativity as well, Wildig in particular. But I think those 3, you're going to struggle to find a harder working trio in this division.
Interesting. That sounds hopeful. Do you think there's enough goals in there?
That's the worry. It does mean there's a lot of pressure on those fullbacks to be bombing forward and creating stuff. And I think that for me is the big kind of unknown at the moment.
Because Scott Bennett, I don't think is going to score more than 1 or 2 a season. Wildig sort of likes to create from deep, I would think. But maybe Harry Charsley, with his athleticism, if he can break into the box a bit, hopefully he can grab a few goals. I would certainly take some of the load off Omar Bogle and co. And speaking of strikers, Kieran, what do you make of Will Evans? Because I think I watched him in the game at Crewe Alexandra where he came from behind to win 2-1 there, and I thought Will Evans really ran his socks off. I'm not sure quite how much quality he's got beyond that, but certainly in terms of work ethic, you can't ask for much more from him that I can imagine.
I mean, yeah, most of the squad, you can't doubt their work ethic, but Will Evans has been a interesting player to kind of look towards his progress this season, because he started off the season kind of playing striker, then he's dropped down to a more attacking midfield, then he's went into the midfield, and more towards the end of the season he was playing a wing back. So Mr. Versatile is kind of the way I want to say him. And like we've mentioned with the signings we're making, in that they can play multiple positions, Will Evans is literal definition of that. I personally don't think he's got the ability to kind of shoot consistently enough to play a striker, but wing back is the role that I kind of saw the most out of him, because he's got the energy to run up and down the field for most of the game anyway, and he's got the for the most part the passing quality and the kind of positional play that you kind of want in a wing back, especially with how influential those positions were throughout the entire season. But yeah, personally, I don't think he's a striker at all. Maybe he's an attacking midfielder, but if I was to say play him anywhere, I'd play him on the wing backs.
Interesting. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it is the great debate that divides Newport fans, is where is Will Evans' best position, and he is another one who can play multiple places. Ultimately, I think the place where I would be getting him to focus is on being a wing back. It fits with our system. I think probably it fits with his skill set, but he needs to work at it. But can I just say, for a player who, again, came in from the Cymru Premier to us last season, stepped up, played, you'll have the stats in front of you, Gabriel, but, close to 40 games, may even have been more than 40 games last season. Like, he played an incredible amount of football, worked his socks off. Start of the season, particularly after Zanzala got injured, we were trying to get him to play up front. He didn't get the goals, and I think maybe put a little bit too much pressure on himself. But when he was playing on the left-hand side, he was a proper 100% every game, very much Graham Coughlin sort of player. And I think by the end of the season, we were super impressed by the guy's application and honesty as a player. And I have no doubt he will be a big part of the squad this season. And he's another one who, if you look at the number of games he played for us last season, but also the number of games he's played, albeit at a lower level in the Cymru Prem, he's a man who's got a lot of of games under his belt and brings actually a lot of experience with him.
Yeah, you've kind of hit on a point there, Ed, that I want to explore more generally, which is I think, and I don't mean this in a way to sort of flatter Newport County, but I genuinely feel this. I think you're a special club in the sense that as a fan base, when you're given a team and a group of players to really believe in, the place can just be electric in a way that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the UK. But I feel like it takes a certain kind of manager to really extract that from the Amber Army. And I felt like you had it under Justin Edinburgh, and I felt like you had it under Michael Flynn. But there were periods between Justin Edinburgh and Michael Flynn, and there probably a period between Michael Flynn and maybe Graham Coughlin, where that sort of spirit, you weren't, the managers in place weren't able to sort of extract that spirit at Newport County. And I just wonder to you, Kieran, do you think Graham Coughlin has the skill set to really sort of connect with the Amber Army and really bring that spirit out of them?
I mean, there's again nothing I can really say that isn't positive about what Coughlin's done since coming in. Obviously came in towards the kind of beginning parts of last season. Since then, he's revolutionized the team in a way in such a short amount of time. And I think a lot of that goes to Joe Dunn as well, for what those two have been able to do behind the scenes, off the field, training wise. It's built a team that is very energetic, and for the most part won't give in and will try and fight for a result. Again, for the most part, there were a couple of hiccups here and there that kind of caused kind of outroar, but it's mostly consistent. But yeah, Coughlin, I think another thing that a lot of people like about him is a lot of the things he says after games in press. He's really like happy with how a performance is. If he's won a game 2-1, for example, he won't go as much into the goals. He'll go into how have we let the other goal in. And he's got a real winning mentality. He's got a real winning mentality. I think the only time where I saw him say that he was happy with the game was at the end of the Northampton Town game at home. So other than that, I think the drive that he has to make his team fight for the badge and fight for the fans, he knows the responsibility that the players have to kind of entertain the fans. He knows the ambition that we all have and the reason that we've all come here to spend money and go to games. Yeah, he's got a level of, he's very level-headed. He won't be egotistical and kind of say that he's done incredibly well if we haven't performed too well. So with that, I think his continuous drive to do better is a very big part of the reason that Newport fans have stuck behind him, and that atmosphere at Rodney Parade has definitely improved throughout the season.
Anything you'd add to that, Ed?
Not especially. I think he's a very honest guy, and he sets high expectations of his team, and I think they respond to that. I think it perhaps helps, and maybe I'm doing him a disservice here, but as I said right at the top, we know we don't have the biggest budget in this league. He knows his job is, first of all, let's get ourselves to 40 points and survive, and then see what happens after that. I suspect he's perhaps under a bit of pressure this season as well to try and make sure we have a cup run or two to help balance the books. So, those are in some ways modest expectations, but realistic ones. It's not like anyone is coming in and saying to him, you've got to win the league. And so I think he knows what he needs to do. He knows how to go about doing it. And I think he's got the trust and respect of everyone around the club to make it happen. So, he perhaps isn't the man we thought we'd have been finishing last season with, if you'd asked me this time last year, and perhaps wasn't the sort of character who maybe we would have expected. But I think he's certainly won everyone round with the way he conducts himself.
Yeah, well, that sounds really encouraging. With that in mind, then, Kieran, I've got to make my 1-24 predictions in a few weeks. So I'm just wondering, what would be the reason for me to be massively optimistic about Newport County pushing up the table and possibly challenging for the playoff places?
I mean, I think the main thing that goes behind not just the players that definitely have quality, maybe not on paper, but the way that Coughlin makes his team play is a way that we can grind out results. At times it isn't pretty, but it may be a 1-0 win, and we'll go on a consecutive run of picking up very narrow wins, but we were just about better. So it's one of the situations where maybe we won't play the most pretty football in the league, but Coughlin, I don't think will have a situation where we'll go on a consistent run of bad form. I think he knows after a bad result how to bounce back from that, how to get his team to play well for the next few games onwards. So again, it all depends with every single team in the league, because this is such an open league too that you could honestly put anyone between 1 and 24 and it could happen. So yeah, with putting us in the playoffs, it's one that on paper you don't really see. You kind of see very much a lower in the table finish. But I think what we've kind of got to take in mind if you are to do predictions of where we're going to finish is how Coughlin gets the players responding to feedback and how he conducts all the players in training.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that can really continue, and certainly really impressed with that impact he's made. Ed, I'm going to ask you the other question, which is, what will be the reason for me to be really cautious about Newport County for next season and say they could maybe be in for a bit of a relegation dogfight?
Well, I think there are multiple reasons to be cautious about how we will do next season. I think I said at the start, if last year you look at it and you say, well, if we'd had Graham Coughlin for a full season, we'd have finished in the top half. But obviously now we're going to like second season syndrome. We've lost quite a lot of experienced players. I don't think we've necessarily I think we've done a reasonable job of replacing them, but we are going to lose a little bit of quality. We are going to lose a little bit of squad depth. And because of the budget shortfall that we've got, we end up having to take a chance on other clubs' cast-offs, punts on players from a lower level, crocs, injuries, unproven loanees. And like any set of fourth division players, they're going to have weaknesses as well as strengths, and their form is going to be inconsistent. But and here's a reference that neither of you will get, young things that you are. It reminds me of the 1980s kids cartoon, The Raggy Dolls, about a bunch of imperfect children's dolls who got thrown into the reject bin but managed to climb out and have wonderful adventures. And that's what Newport County do season after season. We take the rejects, we get them to work together, compensate for each other's deficiencies, and then they have a marvellous adventure together. And I think that's what this season is going to be. We're going to have a bit of a ragtag squad under a good, honest manager. They're going to be battling against the elements. They're going to be battling against financial instability off the pitch. I don't think we're going to be in a relegation scrap, but I think 17th is where I reckon we'll end up being. And to be honest, if you offered that to me now, I'd settle for it.
Well, EFL debate, come for the football chat and stay for the mountain goat analogies and 80s commercials. Listen, it's been great to chat to Newport County to you both. Hopefully you can make some progress on last season, and hopefully Graham Coughlin can really bring that sparkle back to Rodney Parade, because it's a fantastic atmosphere whenever the place is rocking. So thanks to you both. We really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, Ed, what are the 1912 Exiles plans for the podcast next season? What can people expect?
I think we can expect a.
So my audio is going to pack up. My wife, can you?
Sorry, I think there was a slight cut out there. Have we got you back?
You have. Sorry, you were asking me about the podcast plans for the next
Sure.
season. So you were having a busy summer. We did a special episode the other week about kits, talking about what makes a good kit, what makes a good Newport County kit. That was lots of fun. I had a chat with the county and the community team the other week, and we've got an episode coming out shortly about some of that. And we'll also have a big eve of season special coming out soon. And then once the season gets started, we'll continue with roughly weekly output, looking at all things going on on and off the pitch at County with the usual panel, but also bringing in the odd friend of the pod here and there, including no doubt Keiron. So yes, at 1912 Exiles on Twitter, 1912 Exiles on Facebook, and you can follow what we're doing there.
Absolutely. Go check it out, folks. This has been EFL Debate, the Newport County Summer Deep Dive. Thanks to Ed from the 1912 Exiles podcast. Thanks to Keiron from Keiron UTC. Thanks to you for watching at home, and we'll see you again very soon.